What's going on, Grandma?
Look, I need you to come over here and cut Grandmama grass. Baby. Lord, I can't never get this thing to work right. See?
Up my own bitch when he ain't love me. When I ain't have my slider right, them hoes ain't fuck me. Yeah. I be on some 55. I know my mom proud of me. I know they cook real good. I just can't put down. I do it real big. But they don't deny legit. Look at what I live. You know I can't stop. And I don't want no more love. I feel this poison. Late at night I can't sleep cause I hear voices telling me I'm too deep. Quit trying to force it. Yeah. Got too much stuck on my chest. Can't get it off of me. I put my demons to rest, but they just stalking me. Lord knows I try my best.
DeShonda Higgins found out her daughter was dead from a Facebook message sent by inmates before the prison said a single word to her. On June 16, 2024, her daughter, Orion Chavea Grace, clocked in for an early shift at a Georgia prison and never came back out. That gun that killed her had been inside the prison for over a year, and the prison officials did nothing about it.
An inmate at Smith State Prison in southeast Georgia shot and killed a 24-year-old female food service worker early Sunday morning. The incident occurred around 4:30 a.m. in the prison's kitchen, before the inmate turned the gun on himself.
No one deserves to die. And especially at work, where she was working hard to take care of her kids.
Before we get into what happened that morning, you need to know who these two people were, because this story only makes sense when you understand the full picture of how they ended up in the same room at 4:30 in the morning with a loaded gun between them. Orion Chavea Grace was born on September 21st, 1999, right in Statesboro, Georgia. She grew up in a large, tight-knit family and graduated from Statesboro High School in 2018. What a lot of people do not know about Chavea is that before she took the food service job, she had already worked as a corrections officer for the state of Georgia, so she was not somebody who walked into a corrections environment blind. She had done that work before and knew what the inside of a facility looked like. By the start of 2024, she had moved over to Aramark, a big private company that provides food services to prisons and jails all over the country. Through Aramark, she was placed at Smith State Prison in Glenville, Georgia, which is a maximum security facility, meaning it holds some of the most dangerous people in the state. She worked the early morning shift in the kitchen, preparing meals, and she had been there for less than 5 months by the time everything went wrong. At home, she had 2 kids, a 1-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter. Her mother, DeShonda Higgins, told reporters that Chavea was the kind of woman who worked herself to the bone for those children.
So be real still for me, okay? Listen one more time here.
Sometimes going 11 to 14 days straight without a day off, just to make sure the bills were paid and her kids had what they needed. She was also saving money to go back to school for nursing. That was the goal she was working toward every single morning when she showed up at work before the sun came up. Now let us talk about the man who shot the gun, lled Hart, because his story starts long before he ever crossed paths with Chavea. Hart was born in 1990 and grew up in the Villa Rica area of Carroll County, Georgia, which is a small community west of Atlanta. He had a criminal record going back to 2007, starting with smaller offenses like forgery and repeatedly failing to show up to court dates. But in 2013, things escalated badly. On May 27, 2013, during a Memorial Day party in Villa Rica, an argument broke out between Hart and a 46-year-old man named Henry Jr. Mathis. Hart went to a nearby car, got a handgun, came back and shot Mathis multiple times on the sidewalk. Mathis was rushed to the hospital but did not survive. Hart and his accomplice, a man named Joshua Arnold, ran from the scene, but they were both caught and charged. In March of 2015, Hart stood in Carroll County Superior Court and pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and aggravated battery, which means he admitted to killing someone without it being premeditated first-degree murder. He received a 20-year sentence with a maximum release date of June 2043, and he was sent to Smith State Prison to serve that time. This man was not a petty offender doing a short bid. He was a convicted killer who had already taken someone's life before he ever laid eyes on Orion Chavea Grace. So now we have a young mother working in the kitchen of a maximum security prison and a convicted killer doing 2 decades inside those same walls. The question is how the two of them ended up in a relationship, and the answer to that has a lot to do with what was already broken inside that facility long before Chavea ever started her first shift. Smith State Prison had a serious favoritism problem. Certain inmates were being treated differently by staff, getting access to places and privileges they had no business having. Hart was one of those inmates. He was reportedly allowed to move through restricted areas of the prison, including the kitchen, even though he had no legitimate reason to be there. The guards who should have been enforcing the rules were not doing their jobs, and that gave Hart repeated access to the same space where Chavea worked her morning shift. That repeated contact is how the relationship between Hart and Chavea developed, and it's also what created the conditions for what happened next. Because while all of this was going on, there was something else inside Smith State Prison that nobody in charge seemed to want to do anything about. A gun that had been smuggled inside and was moving around freely through the facility. By January of 2024, photos of that gun were already circulating among inmates on contraband cell phones when Chavea was just a few weeks into her new job. Here's how the gun got inside Smith State Prison, because this part is important, and it tells you everything about how badly this facility was being run. Sometime between June 30th and July 10th of 2023, roughly a year before the shooting, somebody threw a package over the prison fence. Inside that package was tobacco, clothing, suspected drugs, and a loaded gun. The gun was part of a bigger smuggling operation that investigators would later describe as a large-scale criminal network connected to people inside the Georgia Department of Corrections itself. The original plan, reportedly, was to use the gun to help a life-sentenced inmate escape, but the escape never happened and the gun stayed inside the prison. The people who had been holding it got put in solitary confinement after being caught with contraband phones, so the gun was passed along and ended up in the kitchen, where it eventually landed in Hart's possession. And here's the part that's genuinely hard to stomach. Inmates inside the prison tipped off Georgia Department of Corrections officials about that gun more than once during official investigations over the course of more than a year. The officials heard those warnings, acknowledged them, and still did not order a single lockdown. They didn't conduct a serious search or take any meaningful steps to find that weapon and get it out of there. By June 13, 2024, investigators knew about the gun's presence and confirmed it internally, and still nothing was done. 3 days later, Orion Chavea Grace was dead. On June 16, 2024, at around 4:30 in the morning, Hart walked into the kitchen at Smith State Prison. He was not assigned to be there. There were no guards supervising the area, and Chavea was alone getting the morning meal ready. According to the account that was later passed on to her family, Hart asked for people to clear out of the kitchen, and then he shot Chavea in the head as she fell from the counter, then shot her again, and then turned the gun on himself. Both of them were pronounced dead on the scene.
Mike Sealer.
And I'm Dawn Baker. Tonight, we continue to follow that deadly shooting inside the Smith State Prison over the weekend. It happened yesterday morning. The Georgia Department of Corrections says 24-year-old Orion Grace was working as a food service employee for Aramark in the prison when inmate Jadrakus Hart, who was in a personal relationship with her, shot her and then himself.
Our Tyler Mannion has been looking into this all day. Joins us now live in the studio. Tyler, what new information have you been able to learn?
Mike, Dawn, the Georgia Department of Corrections tells me this incident brings the total number of deaths in state prisons in 2024 to 130. That number, you might remember, includes 2 inmates who died in the same week at Smith State Prison back in February, Vicarious Mahoney and Janelle Gray. The GDC tells us both of those investigations are still pending autopsy reports right now. And we also asked the Department of Corrections for an update on the prison lockdown and pause to visitation rights today, but we are yet to get a response to those questions. Along with the GDC, here's who else we've reached out to for answers today. We are currently waiting to hear back from the Tatnall County Sheriff's Office. That's where the prison is located. I've also talked with Matthew H. Lovett and Sons Funeral Home, who's arranging Grace's service. They tell us the details for that service are still being worked out. We are also waiting to hear back from Statesboro High School, where Grace graduated from in 2018, according to her Facebook page. I was able to speak with the group who advocates for better treatment in prisons. They say this latest incident only adds to their concerns.
Everything else that could be in there, a freaking gun was introduced into the facility, and now you have 2 dead people. So I think, that's my frustration.
Randolph, who you just heard from, says he was incarcerated himself for a short period of time and now leads his group trying to make sure detained people are treated fairly. I also reached out to people who knew Grace to try and hear about the life she lived. We'll update this story as soon as we hear back from them.
Thanks a lot, Tyler. WTOC has continued to follow the recent crimes surrounding Smith State Prison. You can take a look at all of our past coverage by heading to our website, WTOC.com.
A suicide note was found near Hart's body, but its contents have never been made public. Now here's the part that tells you everything you need to know about the state of Georgia's prison system. Chavea's mother, DeShonda Hagans, didn't find out her daughter was dead from the prison. She didn't get a call from Aramark. She didn't hear it from law enforcement.
The family of the woman killed in a murder-suicide at Smith State Prison this week learned about her death from an inmate before hearing from the Georgia Department of Corrections. The GDC says an inmate used a contraband cell phone to call a family member of Orion Grace shortly after she was killed. You may remember authorities say inmate Jadrakus Hart shot and killed Grace before turning the gun on himself. The GDC says the family arrived at Smith State Prison before they could even contact them. A spokesperson said, quote, the family was escorted to a private area of the facility where they were on scene for approximately 7 hours and were continually updated as investigators and facility staff were able to determine other details.
Inmates inside the prison used contraband cell phones to get online, search Chavea's social media accounts, find her family members, and send them a detailed message describing exactly what had happened, including the claim that Chavea's last words were, "But I have children."
24-year-old Orion Grace's family started getting messages on Facebook early Sunday morning that something was terribly wrong at her job at Smith State Prison.
Inmates were going through social media, looking on her social media to find people related to her.
And that's how Deshonda Higgins found out about her daughter's murder. The prison says inmate J. Hart shot Grace, then himself. She was working for the food company Aramark in the kitchen there. Prison officials said Monday they believe Grace and Hart had a personal relationship, but her mom sees that as a deflection.
What does that have to do with an inmate having a gun to kill my child?
This was before the institution had communicated anything official to anyone. The GDC later said the inmate contact was premature because staff were still figuring out the details. The problem, according to the GDC, was the timing of the message, not the fact that a gun had been sitting inside a maximum security prison for over a year without anyone doing anything about it. Higgins rushed to the facility and spent 7 hours there receiving updates from the GDC's Director of Professional Standards. And in the days that followed, while Higgins was still trying to process losing her child, the GDC investigators showed up at Chavea's apartment with a search warrant.
She says investigators have ripped apart her daughter's apartment while executing a search warrant, leaving behind this mess.
And bust the bags open all over my grandchildren's stuff. They broke her bed.
It's not clear what, if anything, they found.
The GDC never said publicly what they were looking for or what, if anything, they found. But the direction they were heading in became clear the very next day when they put out a statement saying that Hart and Grace had a personal relationship. This was clearly meant to suggest that Chavea's connection to Hart was somehow part of the problem, and by extension that she might have had something to do with the gun being there.
What does that have to do with an inmate having a gun to kill my child?
Deshonda Higgins and the family were not going to sit quietly and let the GDC control the story. They hired attorney Brent Savage, who immediately called out what was happening.
News 3 learned that the pair had a personal relationship, but the attorney for Orion Grace's family says investigators should be more concerned with how a gun got behind prison walls.
Firearm in the prison system is beyond me that I can comprehend.
How a firearm got into the hands of inmate J. Hart is the question on the minds of Orion Grace's family. Their attorney Malone Hart sharing their devastation after the death of the young mother of 2.
There's no way that she could have brought it in based off the security she has to go through. It's the security elsewhere that's lacking, and we believe this firearm was actually brought in prior to her ever working there.
The family claiming they have not been treated with respect by the Department of Corrections.
No way that a family should lose a mama or a child, a daughter, because she's in a bad relationship. The focus should be on the system acknowledging that they should do some stuff, take some precautions to stop stuff from this from happening.
Grace began working in the prison kitchen in January. Inmate Hart was serving 20 years for voluntary manslaughter out of Carroll County with a maximum release date of June 2043. A current employee blames Warden Jacob Beasley and Commissioner Tyrone Oliver for not cracking down on contraband. News 3 kept this employee's identity anonymous since she claims to have received several death threats.
The inmates are running the prison. We're just allowed to be there, and we're allowed to go home every day by the grace of the inmate.
She has worked in the prison system for almost 15 years, most recently in the mailroom. She says Grace should have never been put in a deadly situation.
There should be an officer running that kitchen and supervising what's going on and There should be no guns in the institution. Should be an impossibility.
This incident is still under investigation. Now, this is the second killing of a staff member here at Smith State Prison in less than a year. You may remember last October, Correctional Officer Robert Clark was killed with a homemade weapon while escorting an inmate.
Savage was right about the timeline too, because it makes it impossible to put the gun on Chavea. The firearm was smuggled into Smith State Prison in the summer of 2023. Chavea did not start working there until January of 2024, which is a gap of at least 6 months. The gun was already inside the walls before she ever set foot in the building. The GDC conducted its own internal investigation after the shooting, and in April of 2025, one of their own investigators testified that the gun had been inside Smith State Prison for at least a full year before it was used to kill Chavea. That same investigator's testimony pointed toward what was described as a criminal network operating inside the Department of Corrections, meaning corrupt people on the inside of the system itself were part of how contraband like guns and drugs were getting in. This was not a one-time security failure. This was a symptom of something much deeper and more organized. With that testimony on record, Hagans filed a civil lawsuit against the Georgia Department of Corrections in Fulton County State Court in July of 2025. The lawsuit lays out the full case for negligence. The GDC officials received direct tips from inmates about the gun during official investigations over and over for more than a year, and responded to every single one of those warnings by doing absolutely nothing. The complaint describes it as a massive security breach and specifically calls out the fact that Hart was given unauthorized access to the kitchen through staff favoritism, something that should never have been allowed at a maximum security prison. The lawsuit also takes direct aim at the GDC's attempt to blame Chavea, noting that there is no evidence she was involved in bringing the weapon in and that the gun's own timeline makes the suggestion impossible. Attorney Savage described the absence of guards in the kitchen area as awful and horrifying, and said the conditions inside Georgia's prisons should shock people. On top of all of this, a judge sanctioned the Georgia Department of Corrections for refusing to cooperate with the discovery process in a related case, meaning the very institution that was supposed to investigate itself was being penalized for hiding information. As of early 2026, the lawsuit is still pending. No trial date has been set, no criminal charges have been filed against any prison staff, and the GDC has declined to comment on the litigation. The broader picture is not pretty either. In October of 2024, the United States Department of Justice released a report saying that conditions inside Georgia's prisons violate the Constitution, pointing to unchecked violence, sexual assault, gang activity, and a staffing crisis so bad that facilities were operating at roughly 50 to 60% of the guards they were supposed to have.
A system in crisis and out of control. That's how the Department of Justice described Georgia's state prison system.
After an 8-year investigation, tonight the DOJ says the conditions inside Georgia's prisons are unconstitutional. The feds are now demanding the state take immediate action. Atlanta News First reporter Patrick Quinn spoke with justice leaders who found in recent years Georgia prisoners are being killed inside prisons at 3 times the national average.
Tonight, the U.S. Justice Department dropping the hammer on Georgia prisons, saying the state is allowing for unsafe and unconstitutional conditions.
People are assaulted, stabbed, raped, and killed.
The system out of control. From Macon and Columbus to Savannah and Augusta, up from Atlanta to Rome and Gainesville.
The Justice Department just released this 93-page report that found the Georgia Department of Corrections is in violation of the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects prisoners from cruel and unusual punishment.
We can't turn a blind eye to the wretched conditions and wanton violence unfolding in these institutions.
Kristen Clark, the U.S. Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, said since 2016, DOJ investigators found persistent understaffing, under supervision, illicit drug use by Georgia prisoners, and a rampant gang presence. The Justice Department alleges the state has failed to protect prisoners from violence and harm, and that's especially true for LGBTQ prisoners.
Our findings reveal that the leadership at the Georgia Department of Corrections has lost control of its facilities.
I reached out to the Department of Corrections. They took offense to the report alleging federal prisons are just as bad. A spokesperson for the state wrote, quote, DOJ's findings reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of the current challenges of operating any prison system. And DOJ's track record in prison oversight is poor, often entangling systems in years of expensive and unproductive court monitoring. For the Justice Department, fixes in Georgia's prisons started adding more staff, creating a better housing system, and improving how they report problems so they don't persist.
It's time to turn the page. We hope that our report marks a new chapter for people held inside prisons across the state.
Now what's next? The DOJ says they actually want to work with the state to fix these issues, but said consent decrees, which are more legally binding agreements, could be implemented. Also, the DOJ said if the state does not act reasonably with appropriate actions within 50 days, they could file lawsuits.
When you do not have enough people watching what is happening inside a prison, certain inmates start filling that power vacuum, which is exactly the environment that allowed Hart to move around Smith like the rules did not apply to him. And since 2018, more than 360 prison guards in Georgia have been arrested for smuggling contraband into facilities themselves. So the problem is not just what comes over the fence.
No one deserves to die. And especially at work, where she was working hard to take care of her kids.
Deshonda Higgins is now the one raising Chavea's 2 children. The little girl was 4 when her mother died. The baby boy was barely 1 year old. Higgins has talked about being scared that her grandson will grow up with no real memory of his mother at all. And that fear is something that sits with you when you think about what this case actually cost.
Well, Mike, Deshonda Higgins' family was all around the room as we did this interview, showing just how many people Orion's life touched.
She was a sister. She was a daughter. She was a mother. She was loved.
Orion Grace leaving behind a large family, including a 1-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter. Her mother, Deshonda Higgins, says Grace's kids were her life.
She worked 11 days straight, 14 days straight, just to make money, to make sure she could provide for her kids.
Higgins says knowing her grandchildren will now grow up without their mom is heartbreaking.
He's only 1 year old, so he's probably not even gonna remember his mother.
In the wake of her death, Higgins says she and her family are left looking for answers.
My child is dead, and it's no explanation for a firearm to be inside of a prison. Why didn't they search him when he left his dorm? Why didn't they search him before he came into the cafeteria? Why was none of those things done?
All questions we've been asking the Georgia Department of Corrections, who tell us this is an ongoing investigation, and they'll get us more information as soon as they can. Higgins saying the prison should have done more to protect her daughter.
They failed her. You failed her.
Investigators have released few details about this shooting so far. One of them, that Grace and Hart had a relationship. Grace's mom saying that should not be their focus.
She still didn't deserve to die. She still didn't deserve to leave her 2 children. Nobody deserves that. I don't wish this on my worst enemy.
Higgins has said she hopes what happened to her daughter is a real wake-up call, that no other mother should have to find out her child was murdered from a Facebook message sent by inmates on stolen phones before the prison even bothered to call. Until someone inside that system is actually held accountable for what happened to Orion Chavea Grace, the lawsuit in Fulton County is the only thing keeping this from being buried. What do you think about this case? What do you think could have pushed Hart over the edge to murder himself and Chavea? Let me know in the comments section. Also, click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this. See you in the next one.